Chicago's resurgence as one of the premier teams in the NFL began a year ago with the first season under coach Matt Nagy. On this episode of Fantasy Football Films, we take a look at the Chicago offense and dissect untapped fantasy potential. We will focus mainly on the offensive philosophy, but I will touch on the running backs and dive into quarterback and receiving play. And the driver behind the wheel of this offense is Mitchell Trubisky. He is entering his third year as the NFL quarterback, but only his second with Matt Nagy. He saw a significant improvement last year, which was primarily the product of the offensive scheme, but he silently produced during stretches of the year. It still wasn't enough to break him into the QB1 range, but I believe he will improve this year in an offense that has a ton of potential, and I grade him as a mid to low-end QB1 this year. The primary focus of this episode is Cohen. He's currently going in the late 5th to early 6th round of PPR drafts, and for me, that's just a little bit too low. I explain why that is later when we start looking at the NFL film. He was incredibly productive last year, but is criticized for his inconsistency. I understand this criticism as he primarily acts as a receiver, but if you build the rest of your team around this, I expect for you to be incredibly happy with him as a high upside RB2. The Bears did draft David Montgomery at running back this year, and I do factor that in when I'm discussing these rankings. I'll mention him more when I start to discuss the fantasy values. The wide receiving core at the Bears' disposal is led by 6-year player Allen Robinson. Allen Robinson signed with the Bears last offseason and had a somewhat disappointing first season with the team from a fantasy perspective. It wasn't his play on the field, rather than really Trubisky not utilizing the offense to his fullest potential. His value as a fantasy asset will be tied to Trubisky's improvement, which I think will happen at least in some capacity this year. And for that reason, I think he is a safe bet as a low-end wide receiver 2 to wide receiver 3 in PPR leagues, with the potential to explode in 2019. And finally, there's the second-year receiver, Anthony Miller. Miller had a very promising rookie campaign that was hampered at times by injury, particularly his shoulder, which has been fine thus far this offseason. I wouldn't consider him injury prone, but he has been banged up throughout his first year, so I wanted to make a note of it. He's very valuable in the end zone and is a gifted young receiver. The problem is that Robinson is the reliable target, and Allen is going to get his targets first. I think Miller can be a spot starter from week to week with the potential to improve to low-end wide receiver 2 value. Now, there are other fantasy players I could make profiles on, such as Trey Burton and David Montgomery. I just wanted to limit my time on this information, as I will discuss their roles throughout the video. To begin to dissect each player's role in an offense, you need to understand the offensive philosophy behind a team, and Chicago's is pretty simple and effective. Understand that it relies on key playmakers to punish the schemes Chicago doesn't want to operate against, and takes advantage of the defenses when they are on their heels. The potential for this scheme is astronomical in today's NFL, but will rely on Trubisky's improvement in his third year. If you understand how this works, then you can understand the fantasy value. To begin this explanation, we go to the fantasy whiteboard. I drew up a basic 11 personnel offense with a somewhat typical cover 3 zone look. The number one goal of any play from Nagy's offense is to get the defense into a zone defense and then shred it with the pass. There are many different concepts the Bears use to attack zone defense, and really, they all work against zone. One I will mention is something called a sail concept, which is designed to stretch the defensive zone vertically on the sideline. If this defender sticks with the out route he is currently over, you know that the running back will be open in the flat, because the linebacker here doesn't have a shot at getting to the flat and covering who in theory would be Cohen on this play. If the original defender had the flat responsibility and released the receiver into the secondary, the play side cornerback would have to either release the seam downfield with no one to cover, or open up the zone for the slot receiver to drop 10 to 12 yards on the sideline. The defense cannot cover everybody. Another concept is this simple 4-seam concept. It's the passing game's way of blitzing a defensive secondary, stretching them downfield. This opens up space underneath for a running back to easily slide into, and then he's off to the races once he receives the ball. All of these play concepts rely on the quarterback's ability to read the defense and find the open man, or the offense will be unable to take advantage of their zone defensive looks. So the question is, how do you force a defense into zone? Two of the three plays I decided to show are from Chicago's Week 11 matchup against the Vikings. It's 1st and 10 and early in the first half. Minnesota appears to be in a cover 2 man defense, but I'll be honest, I'm not entirely sure about this because the defensive back that is pressing at the top of the screen backs off before the snap, which you wouldn't do in a true man coverage. Maybe he didn't get the correct play call. However, Taylor Gabriel is motioned to the opposite side and the defensive back follows, indicating a man-to-man assignment. On this play, the Bears are running a sweep to Gabriel back across the left side of the formation. Now, there's going to be a lot that is going on and a lot of depth. We could talk about defensive assignments, alignments, etc. But what I want my audience to understand is why this type of play, which is a misdirection play, is a man coverage killer. And it's called by Nagy to push the defense back into a zone defense, which he can tear up in the passing game, or blow up in the power run game. The target victim of this play is the near side linebacker. In a man coverage scheme, he would be the one responsible for Cohen during a passing play. As the ball is snapped, he recognizes that Cohen is heading in the opposite direction. In addition, Burton is pulling across to the left side, along with Gabriel, who will receive the ball. In man coverage, the defender aside to Burton is the other linebacker. So Gabriel and Burton are going left, and Cohen is going right. If this was a pass play, the two linebackers are essentially going to collide with one another. In addition, the defender who motioned with Gabriel would head back across the formation, crashing into the linebackers as well. This is a little complicated, but so long as you understand that all important defenders are crashing into each other because of their man assignments, you get the picture. Ideally, the linebackers would stick to their assignment once they recognize this is a run play, and would likely do so if Cohen wasn't capable of getting upfield and beating defensive backs in coverage if Chicago turned this into a play-action sweep. Instead, all the defenders who are playing important roles in stopping the run have to make split-second decisions, with one likely to make a mistake and get burnt. All this to say that this action froze these linebackers long enough and forced them inside for the play side tackle to peel off the defensive end and get a block on the linebacker that the play is being run to. If the defense was in a zone scheme, the linebackers would not have to worry about the other side of the formation and really only have to decide whether they're having a run play or to drop into their zone assignment. I'll point out that Burton didn't bother to block the defensive end. In fact, he is unblocked. The scheme of this run is based on Gabriel's speed to blow past the defensive line and get upfield. The linebacker that was targeted on the play misses his run assignment and Gabriel burns him. On the very next play, the Vikings line up in a zone defense to prevent this type of play from happening again, which Nagy recognizes and then power runs them over. This is how Coach Nagy forces defenses into zone. Defenses can often cheat in man coverage and become more aggressive, as well as defend downfield zone passing concepts, which are at the heart of the Bears' passing game. Using the specialized skill sets of his players, Nagy creates a no-win scenario that is only prevented when players are not given man-to-man assignments. That's why so-called gadget players are so valuable in today's NFL if used correctly. It's not so much a strategy, more than it's an offensive philosophy to design plays to punish defenses who do not show you the coverages you want, forcing them into position for you to beat them with what your offense does really well. You see the best play callers in the NFL do this, like Sean McVay, Andy Reid, and Sean Payton, all teams that made it to their respective conference championships last year. The term gadget, I feel, is a bad term used by analysts to imply a player has a limited skill set, when in reality the player they are describing probably does one or two things extremely well. When you word it like that, you are describing every single player in the NFL. Very rarely, if ever, has there been players that can excel in every single facet of the game. The bottom line is that Cohen is a special talent and excels at what he does do best, and Nagy utilizes him as well as other players to break man coverage. This ensures utilization and is why I'm not concerned with his role next year despite Montgomery being drafted, who I will discuss in more detail later. This next play is from the Bears' Week 9 matchup against the Lions. It's early in the second quarter, 2nd and 6, and the Lions are showing what looks to be man coverage. Trubisky motions Trey Burton to the inside of the slot receiver, where you will see that the linebacker shadows him, hinting that the Lions are indeed in man coverage. Cover 1 man to be precise. The Bears have called a pass play, which is a mesh concept across the middle featuring Trey Burton and Tariq Cohen. Both of them are running overlapping crossing routes, with Burton going over the top to provide a rub against the defender who's covering Cohen. As I mentioned in a previous video, the rub concept is a pick in the open field to disrupt the defender in man coverage to create space for the primary receiving option, which on this play is Cohen. I'll stop play here just to point out where Burton sets his rub. While it's not completely clear in this presentation, trust me when I say that this rub forces the defender away from Cohen, creating space to complete the pass and Cohen to turn upfield. I chose this play for 2 reasons: to serve as another example of how the Bears break man coverage using their players, and to introduce the mesh concept. First, I'll point out that Cohen and Burton are the personnel who are responsible for the success on this play, showing that Coach Nagy trusts them as reliable options to perform key roles in their offense, which is to break man coverage. This can be done in multiple ways, but I decided to feature 2 very different plays, both of which utilizes the players' skill sets. You can also tell Nagy relies on them heavily because they are trusted to run the mesh. I could do a 2-hour video discussing why this play is so potent in the offense, but I will give you the important points. The mesh is primarily effective against man coverage. It is also effective against zone coverage, focusing in on the same 2 routes. The only difference is the receivers have to recognize the zone coverage and instinctively know where to settle in the zone in the middle of the field, guaranteeing that one will be open. This requires the receiver to understand NFL zone coverages and process them in a split second, much like a quarterback does. As you can imagine, you have to trust your receivers to have a high football IQ and good instincts, as well as physically gifted, all traits that make Cohen and Burton special players in this offense. The final play is an example of how the Bears attack zone coverages. I'm going back to the Vikings matchup, and it's midway through the first half, 1st and 10, and the defense is showing what looks to be a cover 2 zone, but it's actually played after the snap as a cover 4. The Bears are running 3 seam routes with a dig by Burton and a short curl route by Cohen underneath. I'll point out that once again, Nagy is using these players to attack the defense, but this time it's against a zone look. The purpose of this play call is to stretch the zone defense vertically to open up the curl route underneath. If a defender collapses down too quickly, it will open up the deep dig by Burton. Trubisky's first look is to check to see if one of the seams gets released downfield, like in a cover 2. If so, he can look to hit the seam if the safety isn't in position to cover. If there is no clear indication that an assignment is going to be missed, which doesn't happen all that often in the NFL, Trubisky just has to check to Cohen, who will have a ton of space to run with the ball. Trubisky likely thought this defense was playing cover 2 when really, none of the seams were going to be open at any time. The safeties are in good position to cover the deep routes, and both outside receivers are covered. However, Trubisky is looking at Gabriel and thinks that this seam is going to be open between the safeties when in reality he is covered, even though Cohen is wide open with a ton of space. Trubisky fires the ball into triple coverage and is intercepted. This play epitomizes my thoughts on Trubisky and the Bears offense as a whole. Nagy puts his players in great positions to utilize their strengths and make big plays. Trubisky just has to be able to read the zone defense, know where to deliver the ball, and provide an accurate pass. Many times he's capable of doing this, and shows the potential he has. But almost every single game you can see huge mental and or mechanical errors on a given play like this one. It's not a difficult read to check to your dynamic playmaker in space. I don't think he's a bad quarterback, but the Bears offense has all the potential in the world. Trubisky's development is what will hold them back from steamrolling opponents, in my opinion. Like I mentioned earlier, even though some of the play concepts Nagy runs are complicated, the goal for our purposes is simple. The goal is to get the defense into zone coverage. If they're in man coverage, punish them by creating bad matchups and creating space for your key playmakers. If they're in zone coverage, plow them over with the power run or tear up the zone using any number of passing concepts. While I didn't touch on this as of yet, Trubisky relies on Robinson, and if he has a good matchup, he will be the favorite offensive weapon among receivers, hands down. Nothing against Miller, who is a very gifted young receiver. Trubisky's decision-making process shows that he relies on Robinson to win his matchup in difficult situations. So for fantasy value, the main player I want to highlight here is Tariq Cohen. He's currently going in the late 5th to early 6th round of PPR drafts, and I think that's a bit low. He's heavily utilized in the offense, and if you get him in the 5th or 6th round, you'll be pretty happy with him as your RB2. The one downside to having him on your team is that he doesn't have the consistency of most running backs since he's primarily a receiver. I understand that, but just think of him as a wide receiver too that you can start as a running back. Just plan to offset his inconsistency with reliable week-to-week production elsewhere. As for Montgomery, who I haven't spoke of much yet, he's a rookie running back who a lot of people are comparing to Kareem Hunt from at least a role standpoint, but I don't see this. This whole rumor comes from the fact that Matt Nagy was the offensive coordinator in Kansas City when Hunt was drafted. Just like Hunt, the Bears committed significant assets to acquire him. Let's remember, Kansas City did not have a Tariq Cohen as a running back matchup in the secondary, so Hunt took on that role as well as the running back role. It just doesn't make sense to remove one of your key weapons on the field you use to get the defense into zone. I view him as an athletic version of Jordan Howard last year. Howard was a square peg trying to fit into a circle hole. Being a receiver was not in his skill set, but it is in Montgomery's. I see him as a low-end RB2 and perhaps a slight bump in value in standard leagues. For the receivers, Allen Robinson is going in the 7th round, which, at that value, makes him one of my favorite receivers in that position of the draft, just when you consider the upside of this offense. Ideally, I would like him as my 3rd or 4th receiver, knowing there's a significant chance he could blow up this year. It may not be the most comforting thing to know his value is tied to Trubisky's development as a quarterback, but I have confidence he's going to make great improvements this year. Robinson is the reliable receiving weapon because of his ability to create space and take advantage of Nagy's offensive scheme. When times get tough, Robinson is the man Trubisky turns to, and that alone I think is more valuable than a 7th round pick. As for Anthony Miller, I like him as a receiver and believe he has a bright future in the NFL. Unfortunately, he really doesn't have much potential while Robinson is there. I do believe he possesses a mid wide receiver 2 ceiling if Mitch goes nuts this year. which he could, but I'm not expecting that. Fortunately, you get him dirt cheap in your fantasy drafts, and there aren't many other players in the 11th round I would draft over him, to be honest. He has real potential to develop as a fantasy asset, and I would suggest that if you see him in the 11th, picking him is a good decision. Trey Burton is one of, if not my favorite, late tight end targets if you wait to draft a tight end. Not all offensive schemes feature a tight end. This one does. I know he didn't connect much with Trubisky last year, but Burton is being trusted with the Travis Kelce role. The connection with Mitch just wasn't there. I say Travis Kelce role because that is what Nagy said of Trey Burton when they signed him in the 2018 offseason. He wasn't lying, the stats just didn't follow, which they very well might this year. And finally, Trubisky. He's one of my favorite quarterback targets because I think he's a lock as a quarterback one and has incredible potential. He has the skills to take this offense to a complete other level. He just has to improve with consistency, which I do believe he is capable of doing. I'm not saying he's going to be Patrick Mahomes, but if there's going to be a huge leap at the quarterback position this year, my pick is Trubisky. And for what it's worth, I'm picking the Bears to win the NFC North this year as well. And with that concludes this episode of Fantasy Football Films. If you like our content, please hit that like button and subscribe for more videos I'll be releasing. I'm on Twitter @RobFFFilms. My name is Robert Athey. Thanks for watching.